Okay, so this week we are going to be talking about chapter 10, which is about economic and social inequality both in US and globally. So, in this chapter, we will be thinking about defining and measuring income inequalities, and we will particularly talk about two measures, Lawrence curve and Gini coefficient, and then move on to talk about inequality trends in the United States and show how United States compares to other countries in terms of economic inequality. Then we will also discuss recent trends on global inequality across the world, and after that we will move on to discuss the causes and consequences of rising inequality, as well as discuss some policy proposals that could address such inequality. So, we will start with defining and measuring inequalities. So, the first question that arises is, so the first question that need to be answered is inequality of what? When the subject of inequality arises, what do we think about? What kind of inequality? And more often than not, what we think about is this income or wealth inequality. And this is indeed one of the central questions of economic analysis on inequality. And this chapter also focuses on this kind of inequality, but it is also important to recognize that inequality is a broader concept that extend beyond the realm of income, wealth and money, right? So, there are multiple parameters to think about when we are thinking about inequality, and one of the most important parameter, which is very important in the current times that we are living in, is the health inequality, right? So, do health matter when we think about inequality? And it does. Vast inequality exists in the quality of both healthcare access as well as outcome across the world. And a 2017 analysis shows that average life expectancy in the United States is 10 to 15 years longer for wealthiest Americans than for the poorest Americans. So, health inequality also intertwines with income and wealth inequality. Another parameters to think about when thinking about inequality is education, right? So, there is also considerable evidence that there is a huge inequality in terms of education both in US as well as globally. The, to think about US, the achievement gap between the student from low and high income families in United States has actually increased dramatically in last 20 years. And there is of course difference in educational achievement by race and gender, which though even though has decreased in last 20 years, but it still remains significant. And the last parameter that is also has current importance, or is the environmental outcomes. So, inequality also manifests in certain environmental outcomes, as some proponents of environmental justice point out that polluting industries and toxic waste disposal sites in the United States tend to be located disproportionately near poor and minority community, and as this in this cartoon, that the rich are getting richer and the poor is getting the byproduct of what they are producing, right, which is toxic waste and polluted air. So, we while recognizing that these various type of inequality exist and are important to think about, this chapter focuses narrowly primarily on the income and wealth inequalities, and the two most common metrics used to measure such income inequalities is first either to measure the income share percentage of all income held by various groups ordered by income from poorest to richest, right? For example, the bottom 20%, the middle 20%, the top 1% extra. Or the other way to measure income inequality is to measure the overall distribution of income in a society. And we will use both of these measures and think about these measures and look at income inequality in the US and in the world. Okay, so first we will talk about the first approach of measuring income inequality, which is about thinking about these income shares. And the table here presents the distribution of household income in the United States in 2016, and the data is arranged in order of income and the share of the total income that accrues to each 20th percentage of individuals, which are also known as percentiles or quintiles. And in the second column we have the share of income, and to understand this table better, imagine dividing up US household into 5 equal sized groups. So they are all part of a big pie, and with the lowest income household in one group, so bottom 20% means lowest income household that fall into that 20% of the bottom pie, and the next lowest in group means second 20%, and the next group means third 20%, and so on. And note that the table also breaks out the richest 5% as a separate group, because to show income inequality, it is good to see what group holds most of that pie. And what we can see from this table and also from this pie chart is that the lowest income quintile has a household income of below 24,000 approximately, and they receive only 3.1% of all the household income in the US, right? While the richest quintile, top 5%, have an income of more than 22 lakh 25,250 on an average, and they receive a total share of income of 22.6%. And if we look at the top 20%, they have an income of around 1,21,000 or more, and they receive a income share of 51.5%. So that essentially means more than half of all the income received in the United States goes to top 20% households, and the top 5% of the households receive nearly as much income as the bottom 60% together, right? And this data is really important because based on this data we can now construct several measures of inequality based on this distribution of income along these quintiles or percentiles, right? So one common measure of is the ratio of the income share of the richest fifth to that of the poorest fifth of the population. And uh, from this table we can see that this is going to be around 16%, which means that household in the richest 20% have over 16 times the income on average of the household in the poorest quintiles. And this table will also help us in building on the income inequality measures that are used generally in economics to understand such inequality.